I want to tell you a story about a student that I work with. So she came to me to start her yoga journey in her 50s. She practiced every single day. She gave it everything she had. And then one day, she just stopped progressing. She came to me devastated and completely convinced that her age had finally caught up with her. What I told her didn't just change her practice, it actually changed her entire relationship with herself. So, if you've been practicing yoga for a few years, maybe even longer, and you've hit this point in your practice where nothing really seems to be changing, then I want you to know something. First, stop comparing yourself with that 20-year-old in class that can do backbends so effortlessly, and stop treating your age as the biggest problem on your wellness journey. And I just want to be honest with you, I don't like to sugarcoat things here, and almost nobody in the yoga world will say this out loud because they're busy pretending like a flimsy foam block is going to make up for the fact that you're losing bone density every single day. And I'm sorry to be the one that breaks it to you, but the plateau that you've been experiencing recently, it's not a physical problem, it's a mental one. And I know that sounds frustrating to hear when what you could do just a few years ago feels so hard now. But because you've been doing this movement thing for so long, because you have a lifetime of experience, I think more years than I've been alive, and you already know what poses to skip, what to avoid, how to modify, I don't need to be the one that tells you to be gentle with your body. You already know that. So stay with me because what I'm going to do is give you genuinely the best news that you could possibly hear, which is that what's happening in your mind, we can work with. But what's happening in your body, you already know what to do. So I've been here in Mysore for the last couple months, and I've been doing this training with the last living masters from Krishnamacharya's time. It's such an incredible opportunity. But I was in this lecture with T.R.S. Sharma. He's 99 years old. And he was walking with a walking stick and making jokes about it, but he seemed so light. And I genuinely just put up my hand and I asked, okay, so you're 99 this year. What does your yoga practice actually look like today? Having been someone who had done 300 asanas by the time he was 16, I just asked him, like, what does it look like today? And he told me what you would expect, which is it doesn't involve asana, it's mostly pranayama and the concentration and spiritual stuff. And so that kind of fascinated me because we almost have this obsession with wanting to do more and more asanas, but yoga has so many other limbs, and you've heard this a million times. But what I've observed both in my colleagues, people who are practicing well into their 50s and 60s here in Mysore, as well as my students worldwide, is that every single practitioner goes through the exact same stages, regardless of when they start the journey of yoga. So first, there's this falling in love with yoga stage. And this is like the honeymoon phase. You discover yoga, it lights up something in you. You can't stop going to classes, you can't stop practicing. You begin to tell others about it, and you notice how it's changing you from the inside out. And then comes the plateau. So you hit this posture that you feel like, your body just can't do, this balance that you just can't seem to hold, and the strength that you knew that you could have had when if you tried or started yoga younger, but that, just feels a bit harder as you come into it at this age. And either you get curious or you just get frustrated and you quit. And most people, I say this with complete compassion, most people get frustrated. And I don't blame you, it's not your fault, because we've been trained our whole lives to push through, to work harder, to do more, to overcome the plateau. And if you come to your practice in your 40s or 50s or 60s, that voice is usually a little bit louder, and it has this thing of safety because you're constantly concerned that you might injure yourself in the practice. And because you have decades of conditioning telling you that if you just tried a little bit harder, or if you just did something differently, or you added strength training, or you went for longer walks, then you will get there in the same way that the 30-year-old is in class. But yoga, real yoga, the kind of yoga that I'm seeing in these masters, asks you to do something completely different. And this is a reframe that I really want you to kind of think of after this video as well, which is that the plateau itself is the practice. You see, the set sequences in traditional Ashtanga, traditional Shivananda, even some Hatha Yoga styles, they're kind of just a guide. They're not like concrete, they're not set in stone. And so we could be tempted to switch it up because we just can't seem to break through that pose, or we feel like we're so tired after the practice. And if we feel like, this sequence is not serving as a guide, it somehow becomes this authoritative, rigid thing that we have to do 6 days a week. And it stops freeing us in a way. And so the plateau that you're facing right now doesn't mean that you're failing, doesn't mean that your body is failing. It just means that you need to try something different as you grow older. And so the plateau you're facing right now is the practice asking you to evolve. And there's this concept called tapas in yoga that most people translate as disciplined effort or heat, and most people interpret it as forcing, as burning through the resistance. But here's what the ancient texts actually mean when they use the word tapas. It's the willingness to sit in discomfort for long enough to be transformed by it. Not to force, not to push through, not to punish yourself, but to be changed by it. And so the plateau isn't some wall, it isn't the end of a maze. It's a fire, it's a transformative fire. And what you do inside that fire, that is where the real practice begins. And before I go into what I call the inner shift, the specific thing that transforms the plateau into a breakthrough, I want to mention that if you want to explore this in your own practice directly, I do offer a free discovery call. It's just 30 minutes. There's no pressure to buy. I'm not going to sell you something if I genuinely can't help you. It's just a real conversation about where you are and seeing what's possible with your body. The link is in the description below. But right now, let's get back to that plateau and see what we can do about the plateau. So if pushing harder and trying more and doing more isn't the answer, which we've already seen isn't working, then what is? What do we actually do to overcome this internal sense that we're just too old to get back into yoga in the same way that we could have if we started earlier? And here's the shift that I've been trying to get all of my students to see. It's that the people that have lived yoga, who've arrived at this stage in their 80s and 90s, have shifted from an external practice of yoga to an internal practice. From asking, what can my body do, to what is my breath doing in this shape? And in Ashtanga Yoga, we use something called the Trishtana. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's called the 3 places of attention. And when we practice this, the posture, the breath, and the gaze simultaneously, if you're early on in your practice, it can almost seem like it's really hard to do all of these 3 things at once because all your attention is just going to the posture. But when you arrive at a plateau, when you literally can't physically do anything differently in the shape and it just feels like that shape is not for your body, the practice is literally inviting you to discover the other 2/3 of the practice. Think of it this way. If you've been driving a car your whole entire life, only through looking through the windshield, only forward facing, then the plateau is a moment that says, there's mirrors, there's a whole interior to attend to, there's knobs, there's gears, there's things that I can shift from inside. And so even though the road doesn't change or doesn't get narrower or nothing really happens, your awareness, your perception of what is possible somehow begins to get wider. And the practitioners that I've seen who are able to navigate this transition really gracefully are often more engaged in their practice after the plateau, after hitting that wall, than before. Because before they were able to easily glide through the practice, but now you've found something that's worth working with. On the other side of this plateau, there's something called dharana that you work with primarily. And dharana is translated as concentration. It's one of the 8 limbs of yoga that almost all practitioners never quite fully access, because they're still in this battle with the poses and trying to get more poses and do more with their physical body. But as you age, that performative showing aspect kind of begins to drop, and you naturally have to start getting gentler with your practice. And here's where the practice stops being just about yoga and it starts being about everything, and everything becomes yoga. And I know people say this and it sounds like a platitude, but when your nervous system is constantly striving, constantly pushing, constantly achieving, it's almost in this state of activation. And often we don't even know that this is happening, but it's happening in the background. And there's all this cortisol cortisol and adrenaline that's pumping through the system. And that's the same like chemistry that keeps your mind racing at midnight and that makes you feel so exhausted, even though you're in the stage of your life where you can allow yourself to do less, to not hustle so much, to not do the same things that you were doing in your 20s and 30s. And so we have to start to shift to a breath-centered, concentration-based practice. Like all of these masters in their 90s, this is what they're pointing towards. They're pointing towards a practice that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response. And this is the actual biology of stillness. And this is how you can still keep getting this rasa, this juice out of your practice well into your 90s. And so when the body says, I cannot push further, I cannot practice today, instead of frustration, instead of doing more, what if you deepen your breath? What if you just adapt your practice and focus on using the concentrative aspects of it? This way, you're literally rewiring how your nervous system responds to this plateau, responds to this difficulty, not just on the mat, not just for those 60 minutes, but everywhere else in life as well. And so when we approach the practice in this way, it doesn't just remain as a set sequence of postures that we've been prescribed that we have to do 6 days a week. You can focus on the pranayama, you can begin a japa practice, you can even start studying philosophy, Patanjali's philosophy, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Yoga Yajnavalkya. The richness of yoga is so vast that you can literally find something in it until your last breath. Even if you're sitting in a wheelchair, even if you can't move, you can still practice yoga as long as you're breathing. And if you continue in this more breath-centered, concentration-based approach, you'll reduce your suffering in other areas of your life. You'll feel like you're improving. You'll feel like you're growing. You'll feel like you're finding something, even if you're not the kind of person that's like particularly spiritual or religious or doesn't believe in that kind of thing. You can still find something within this vast ocean of the practice that's useful. And so what happened to that student that I talked about in the beginning is that when she came back to me, when she took a few weeks and tried all of these, different things that I was telling her, she didn't just feel defeated anymore because she was tracking and noticing what are the changes in my body. If I'm feeling tired after 40 minutes instead of the usual hour and a half, then can I shorten my practice and give myself a new set of rules that work for me instead of pushing harder and trying more? And so it's not a yoga problem, as you can see, and it's not even your body's problem. It's more the pattern that's happening. The same busy mind that comes to the mat is the same busy mind that was forcing her to wake up at 6 a.m. and drive to a yoga shala and do back-to-back meetings right after that. And that was the same thing that was keeping her awake at night. And though that pattern served her in, earlier years, as she was reaching 60, the plateau in her practice was actually a mirror, a way for her to see that she was growing older. And it was the same neural loop that had been running her entire life, but because of the age, because of the practice, it was finally becoming visible enough for her to do something about it, to work with it on the mat first, and then see how that translates into the rest of your life. And so the mat has this funny way of doing that. It shows you very clearly what you're doing everywhere else in your life. And this is the approach that I have to every single asana. It's not about conquering asanas. It's much more about seeing the pattern that underlies it. And when she made the shift, when she stopped tracking her progress in the postures and started tracking the quality of her breath, started seeing how many times she could use this concentration ability to bring back those existential moments in her life, it then became a form of attention training. It became a form of dropping in and surrendering through bhakti. And within weeks, she didn't just feel different in her practice. She slept better. She made less better decisions without agonizing and worrying too much. It's because she finally understood the pattern that was running the way she was practicing. So if you're in a plateau right now and you've been feeling like you're stuck in your practice for a while, it's not that you need to change everything. You don't need to find a new teacher. You don't, even though if you do want a new teacher, I'm right here. You don't need to push harder or try different things. All you need to do is widen your capacity to move through this with a different lens, to practice in a way that doesn't require you to have more effort, but practice in a way that has more awareness. And this is what yoga at its core has always been about. Not what your body can do, but what your mind can become as a process of putting yourself through that tapas. And if this resonates, and if you want support in making this shift in your own practice and in your life with the support of a community, there is a link in the description below to book a free call with me. There's just 30 minutes, there's no pressure, and I will try and assess what's possible for you at your stage in life specifically. And if you want to get more out of these, videos, then make sure that you watch this playlist and also keep following my channel, subscribe, share this with a friend, do all of the good things, because this then helps me reach more people who are struggling with the same thing. Thank you so much for watching till the very end. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.